Visual Studio is a tool that I use almost daily. I have strong opinions about the best way to configure Visual Studio for the way that I work. The Settings Options dialog is a place to tweak the IDE so that it works the way that you want. The first thing that I want to show you in this movie is how to save your settings or import existing settings. To do that, I'm going to open Visual Studio and go to the Tools menu. And then I'm going to scroll down to this section here, Import and Export Settings. So here's the idea. When you get Visual Studio configured the way you want, you can come into this dialog and choose to export your selected environment settings. When I click on Next, I can pick from a list of settings. By default, it chooses all the settings. And then I can click on Next. Here's where I can pick the location and name of the file that contains my settings. Pretty easy to do. I just click on Finish. Success. Later, I can come back into that Settings dialog and choose Import Selected Environment Settings, and then click on Next. It asks me if I want to save my current settings. I'm going to say no, thank you. And here, I can go out and browse for the file I just saved. Or, this is another important part, I can choose from a set of default settings. General development, Visual C# development. So at any point in the future, if you want to change from being a Visual Basic keystrokes to the C# keystrokes, you just go in here and choose Visual Basic or C# development settings. And that will replace the default settings for those style developers. Now that you know a little bit about how to save and import your settings, let's go and take a look at some settings themselves. I'm going to start by going to Tools Options, down here at the bottom. And there's a lot of settings in here. Obviously, I don't have time to cover all of them in this movie, so we'll just look at a few of them. I'm going to start by looking at the General Settings area. We go to Environment, and then in here there's a section called Keyboard. This is where you can configure Visual Studio to use the keystrokes that you want. What I can do is find an action. Like here's one called File Save All. When I click on it, I can see that that's assigned to the Control-Shift-S keyboard. I can come down here and type the new keystroke that I want. Let's say I want to do Control-Alt-S. I'm going to type in Control-Alt-S, and it says that shortcut is currently assigned to View.Server Explorer. If I'm okay with replacing that, I can click on this Assign button, and now whenever I choose this keystroke, it's going to run the file.saveall. Another feature I like in here is the project settings. We go into Projects and Solutions and pick General. In here are a number of settings like where do we store our projects, the default location, where your templates are located, right? One here that I like to turn on and off depending on my situation is Track Active Item in Solution Explorer. So what happens here is if I click on a code tab in Visual Studio, it will go over to the Solution Explorer and highlight that item without me having to go find it. I like to have the Always Show Solution turned on. That means that no matter whether I'm in a single project file or a multiple project file, it always shows the parent node in the tree view. One that I like to turn off is Save New Projects When Created. So I'm going to unselect this one and show you what that one does. Now I can go to File, New Project, and when I create my project, like this WPF application, I can edit some code in here, make some changes. I'm going to change the width here. And then when I go to close the solution, it actually hasn't saved it in a permanent location. Visual Studio is storing all the changes I make in a temporary location. And at this point, it says, would you like to throw out this temporary project you've created? So if I say discard, it tosses out this trial run. So it's a quick way to try out some ideas without permanently saving the project to my hard drive. Go back and show you one more set of tools. Back into Tools Options. And then I'm going to go to Build and Run. Now, what I like in this dialog is this before building. Building means to compile your application. I'll have a whole chapter on building and the details of what goes on in that process. But essentially, I can choose what happens if I've got a file that I've opened and I've made some changes and I'm ready to compile the application. Do I want it to automatically save the changes? That's what this section means. Or would I like it to prompt me to save changes? Like this. Now I'll create a brand new project. Again, I'll choose the defaults. Now I see it's prompt me, would you like to save the changes to the following items? There are details on all these sections and other movies in this chapter. Remember to use export setting once you get Visual Studio configured the way you want. That way, you won't have to spend a lot of time reconfiguring your environment if your hard drive crashes or you get a new computer. That concludes our grand tour of the Visual Studio developer environment. As you continue in this course, you'll discover more about certain sections of the IDE. But the chapter goal was to give you a good overview of the general layout and tools available inside Visual Studio.